Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tanoa Talk. I am the Kava, and as always, it's good to be with you. This podcast was originally hosted by me and another person. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get in touch with that person, but I'm really happy to be back here talking about some important Kava research, Kava history, Kava papers, just Kava stuff with everyone. And uh, I don't know if everyone is aware; they may or may not be, but I am officially now the executive director of the Kava Coalition. So I'm no longer doing review videos of Kavas um, because I am an unbiased advocate and supporter of Kava in the United States and internationally, and I intend to keep an unbiased approach to talking about vendors, talking about Kava bars, and making sure that the rising tide lifts all boats, as they say. Anyway, the premise of this podcast is to look at the research that has been done into Kava throughout the world, throughout the different disciplines, and to bring some of those insights to Kava drinkers and Kava enthusiasts. And really, that's about it. And every episode, I'll be reading through, not word for word, but like kind of topic by topic. I'll be reading through a paper, highlighting some of the parts that interest me, and then sharing them with you, the listener. So whether you're in your car on your way to work, or you got your earbuds in and you're walking down the streets, and whether you're drinking kava or you're enjoying some yerba mate or coffee uh, as you get over to work in the morning, yeah, you're welcome here, and dip your coconut shell into the Tanoa and drink some kava, and let's talk kava. Bula. Great. So the first paper that we're going to be talking about is kind of a classic. This comes from the Journal of Economic Botany from 1956. This paper was written by Ronald Gatty, who is in the Department of Agricultural Economics at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. So here we have an example of a paper that came out prior to the grass laws that came out. So uh, I don't know whether the listeners are aware of this, but in the FDA determination for grass, which is generally regarded as safe, anything that was consumed in the U.S. prior to 1958 is actually grandfathered in as grass. So, grass determination technically should not be something that kava vendors or kava bars need to be able to prove, because kava has been consumed in the U.S. At least since the Hawaiian Islands became a territory of the United States, um, if not before that. So, yeah, it's a very interesting little factoid that I think everybody would appreciate. This paper is very interesting. It's an overview of kava. It's not like a deep niche analysis of a specific subject, but there's a lot of cool stuff in it that I have not seen anywhere else, and that's why I wanted to go through it. It's divided into different sections. One section is the varieties and distribution of kava, which has some really cool information about kava in places that you don't commonly hear it being discussed. It has a section on kava and myth and legend, which I'll read through a couple of the legends. They're pretty cool. One is from Tonga and one is from Hawaii. Then there's a section on planting and cultivation, the agriculture of kava. Then there's a section on the effects of the narcotic of kava, and some really good insights in that section. By the way, there's a lot of literature out there about kava, and some of it is rather unhelpful. The Getting Stoned with Savages book by J. Martin Troost, which came out in the early 2000s, had a chapter on kava, and in the podcast in Tanoa Talk, when I had a co-host, we discussed that book, and the description of kava in that book is really pretty outlandish. He drinks kava. He's unable to walk. He's like out for 3 days. I think we can all agree that kava doesn't really hit you that hard. Although I have heard some stories from some people who have had similar experiences in nakamals in Vanuatu. So I don't want to completely dismiss these stories, but the author here in this paper definitely has a really good realistic discussion about the effects of kava. He then goes into the commercial considerations. That part of the paper I found to be a little bit boring, but it did highlight some stuff that I'll talk about. So yeah, it's a cool paper. It goes over some really important kind of common topics, and I think more importantly, we get a 1956 summary of kind of the current understanding of kava then, and that helps us kind of prepare the academic world, the discipline, to a kind of a general study of kava that kind of leaches into anthropology, ethnology, sociology, history, law, botany, things like that. So this is a good foundational paper that I really enjoyed. And yeah, so let's get into it. So in the introduction, Ronald Gatty talks about the diffuse literature of the plant and talks about how it has been mostly anthropologists who have written on the subject because of the very important role that it played in Polynesian culture. Sorry, the very important role that it plays in Polynesian culture. I have to use the present tense there because kava remains a very important cultural plant throughout Polynesia and Melanesia. So I think the literature around kava definitely expanded after this paper came out and continued to expand into the current era. The paper doesn't really go into deep ethnological considerations, basically anthropological considerations. You don't get this really deep dive on culture and the role of kava in culture and how kava symbolizes certain things or is used for socioeconomic purposes to kind of divide societies into different hierarchical categories. But it does get into some myth and tradition that surround kava in places like Tonga and Hawaii. So that's something to look forward to as I read through these different sections. He then goes into a section where he discusses the varieties and distribution of kava. And I thought it was pretty interesting to read this because he gives a description of it that I think is interesting. And I'll just read this word for word. This is a quote from another paper, Brown, 1935, where he describes kava this way. It's a shrub 2+ meters in height. The cultivated varieties are 4+ meters in height. Leaves are orbicular ovate, abruptly acuminate, deeply cordate at the base, from 13 centimeters in length, 11 centimeters wide, up to 20 centimeters long, and 18 centimeters wide in the Marquesian species. Glabrous on both faces, with the exception of minutely puberulent veins. Veins 11 to 13 centimeters, the central ones reaching the apex. The petiole glabrous, 2.5 plus centimeters in length. Spike opposite the leaves. Flowers monosporangiate, dioecious. The male spikes much shorter than the leaves. The floral bracts rounded, subcrenate, pultately attached at the center, with a pebulent pedicel. Stamens too. The anthers subglobase, shorter than the filaments. I am very positive that I mispronounced much of the scientific language there, but I read through that and I chuckled just at the kind of obscure, almost Shakespearean language used to describe kava in that paragraph. I thought it was fun to read. Sure, it was accurate for that time. Don't know that anybody in 2025 would describe kava with that choice of language. The author then goes into a really interesting discussion about the origin of kava, and it's very clear at this time, prior to some of Vincent LeBeau's work and other kind of modern kava scientists, that people didn't really know where kava came from. We now know that the kava ancestral plant originates in Papua New Guinea, and that the plant was then domesticated or kind of transformed into a plant that can be used for human consumption as a beverage in Vanuatu. And Vanuatu has the most varieties of kava, and that kind of shows in many different crop histories the origin of a plant. So in Mexico, for example, you have the greatest diversity of corn. Well, not Mexico, but Mexico and Central America. You have the greatest diversity of corn or maize species. That's why you sometimes see like purple corn tortilla chips and multicolored corn cobs. These are all heirloom varieties that have been preserved over the years. And kava is much of the same way. If you go to Vanuatu, you will see dozens of different cultivars that people choose to grow and people sell, and they advertise for having different effects and different flavors and different attractive kind of nuances to them. But the author says here that this species is apparently indigenous further west than Fiji, undoubtedly carried east by early migrants in the Pacific. The wild source is not known, but the plant is now in New Guinea. So at this time, he was hypothesizing that the plant had gone into New Guinea when it actually came out of Papua New Guinea, as we found out later, and many islands of Polynesia and Micronesia. Forster mentioned no type, so Forster is another writer, mentioned no type specimen, but wrote of localities in Tahiti and the Tongan and Hawaiian groups. The plant is in Fiji only as a result of cultivation. So in this context, cultivation is another word for domestication. What's interesting here is the mention of the Marquesas. The Marquesas are not really commonly associated with kava. You don't really hear much about it. He then goes into a really interesting conversation about Easter Island and Tubuai, which I'm probably not pronouncing correctly. So it's very important here to remember that throughout the 17 and 1800s, missionaries often forbade the consumption of kava, and in very plentiful cases, they actually promoted alcohol and actually paid islanders with alcohol for their labor. And just imagine that, you're banning kava and saying that it's somehow like unholy or satanic, and then you're promoting the use of alcohol. Just anybody who drinks kava now knows that kava really kind of dampens one's appetite for alcohol and really leads to a lot of positive health outcomes that people who drink alcohol don't experience. He goes into a discussion about Easter Island, and I'll just quote some of this in full because I find it to be pretty fascinating. The Easter Islanders do not cultivate kava, even though it is used in Mangareva and in the Marquesas, which compose the probable original home of these people. So the Easter Islanders, this is me talking. The Easter Islanders, they moved east from the Marquesas and landed in the Easter Islands. One would have surmised or expected that the Easter Islanders would have brought kava over with them from the Marquesas, but they did not. And it seems like the reason for that is because kava was not able to be cultivated on Easter Island. And so it probably dropped out of the cultural lexicon or the cultural constellation of practices that people brought with them to Easter Island. This reason, however, cannot explain why kava is not cultivated on Rapa, where the climate is favorable. Basically supplying a point on the other side for possibly why it would not be cultivated there. Guam And the Solomon Islands also don't have much evidence of traditional kava use, and that's mentioned in this paper. Um, and then he does mention that kava is grown on the south coast of New Guinea, but with no references to whether it was used. Meaning that kava has been observed in Papua New Guinea, but there is not a lot of evidence that it has ever been consumed in any kind of regular way. Now, the next really important and interesting part of this section goes into pretty deep detail for one of these papers, based on my experience, on the different varieties of kava that exist in the Marquesas. So, you often read a lot of papers about Vanuatu and Fijian kava, but you don't really see a lot of papers that really dive deep into the varieties of kava that exist in places like the Marquesas. And one of the interesting things about this description is that it does contain the description of a two-day or Isa kava, and it is a old paper that talks about the use of a two-day kava. And, this was something that was pretty controversial a few years ago. There was a lot of noise in the kava community about the inclusion of Isa or two-day kava in the available cultivars on the market. This kind of jumped out to me when I was reading the paper. And I'm actually going to read this word for word, and I'm going to mispronounce a lot of things here. If they look completely unpronounceable, I will spell them out for the listener, dear listener, and you can jot them down and correct me in the comments. So we start with Kava Papa Papa, which is regarded as one of the best beverage varieties, about 2 meters in height. Internally, the root is yellowish. Outside, it is rather green. The internodes are short. The leaf blades thin and large, the spikes quite long. All right, so the next one is Kava Puo, Puou, used for kava. Internodes comparatively long and tend to reddish brown. Kava Veaoha, considered an excellent variety for making kava. And by making kava, they mean the drink. Ava Puo, so Ava is just a different word for kava, but Ava Puo, Puou, an excellent variety for making kava. The root is quite tender, facilitating chewing. Large variety growing up to 4 meters, reddish brown, long internodes. So for those of you who don't know, when you talk about chewing kava, traditionally kava was prepared by chewing it. You would have somebody chew or masticate the kava and then spit out the juice into a bowl, which then you would drink from as the kava drinker. That's not very common to see anymore, but it still is practiced. So just if there's any confusion about that, this isn't like people that are, dipping kava or like putting it in their lip and chewing it in their mouth. Although you can do that and get quite a nice effect from it. There used to be some vendors that sold dried kava sticks that you could chew on. They were super strong, mostly waka roots. All right, so the next kava that they mention is a Ava Putea, Putea, used for kava. Internodes vary in length and are of a light color. And this is the Isa variety here, Kava Putoake, Putoake. Informants state that this is the only variety which is used for medicine and for drink. It has a very powerful effect. So what's interesting about that description is that you have Isa or two-day kava being described as something that people use for medicine and for drink, meaning that it's not exclusively used for medicine, but also is used as a social beverage. And I think, it's interesting. I mean, a lot of, I have a couple bags of two-day right next to me. I don't drink it very often, but I do drink it sometimes on weekends, and I find it to be quite nice. it has a bad reputation. It's not the most desirable kava, particularly in these cultural contexts, but there's really nothing wrong with it. There's no evidence that it causes any kind of adverse health issues. In fact, to suggest so, you really do need to back that up with literature, because it is, puts kava in the crosshairs when you describe it as being potentially dangerous. And kava has a lot of problems to deal with. We don't need to add that problem. Yeah, it then discusses some varieties of kava in Fiji, and if you buy Fijian kava, you'll likely recognize some of these. The author divides them into white and black varieties. White varieties, Casa Leka, Casa Balavu, and Kolobi. And just to refresh the listener, when you talk about Casa and Kava, you're talking about the upper part of the root that basically meets the soil. That does produce like kind of a white effect on the kava. So when you squeeze the ava in a kava bag, you will typically get like a whiter colored kava, and it actually tastes really good. But it's not really recommended to drink the casa. Although I have and thought it was quite nice. Black varieties, Leka and Balavu. And the author describes the main distinguishing features of the plant are the length of internode, the size of the leaf scar, and the habit. I don't really know what he means by habit. But now I'm going to go through a couple. The next section is on myth and legend, and I'm going to go through the two different myths and legends that he talks about. I think they're both pretty interesting. Very different from the Vanuatu versions of the stories, but still super interesting. So the first one is from Tonga, and I'm going to read this word for word. I'll try to keep a natural cadence here. All right. There lived a chief by the name of Luau from Hamia, Tongatapu, and one day Luau sailed to the small island Owaiki to visit his attendant Fevanga. But this was a time of famine, and Fevanga was at a loss as to what to feed the visiting chief. There was a kape plant, but it would not provide sufficient food, so that's some kind of food crop. Finally, Fevanga and his wife Fefaka killed and cooked their leprous daughter to be served with the kape. This was the only food they had for their chief. Luau recognized the human flesh at the meal and told the people not to eat it. It should be rather placed in the ground and brought to him when it matured into a plant. Fevanga did this, and the body grew up into kava and sugarcane. So, interesting. You hear often about kava ceremonies having sugarcane present. This seems to suggest that in Tonga, the kava and the sugarcane are both sprouting from this body, which would explain the origin of that tradition and why those two go together. So each of those kava and sugarcane plants arose from a different part of the body. And when it matured, he noticed that a rat chewed on the kava and became paralyzed, and then ate some sugarcane and revived. So it's kind of like the yin and the yang going on there. So the rat chewed some of the kava, got into the soporific kava state, and then chewed on some sugarcane, and then got full of energy and kind of got spring back in its step. Now, when Fevanga took the kava to Luau, it became custom to take a relish, sugarcane, with the kava drink. Some relish just being like a garnish or like something to add flavor. Tradition has it in Hawaii that kava was first. Okay, so now we're moving on to the Hawaii tradition or myth. Tradition has it in Hawaii that kava was first brought in by Oliki Kuka Hiana. Again, not pronouncing that correctly. Very 100% sure of that. Who sailed up from Tahiti. It is said to be first planted. It was said to be first planted on the island of Kauai. Oliki Kukuahiana brought it to the Hawaiian Islands for a fishing plant. When he landed at Kauai, he met and married the beautiful Kamail, who from that time onwards looked after the plants. After a while, however, she threw out the plants, and at a later date, they were found by Mokiha, who asked Olikukuahiana about the name of the plant, and he was told that the name was Paho'i. When the plants were large, Moakia gave some to Ewa, and she determined to find out whether the plant was useful. When Ewa tried the plant and became intoxicated, it received the name Awa, or Ava, and from then on it was called the Ava of Kwamakia. Again, I embarrassingly, stumbled through that description because I do not know how to pronounce these words, nor will I ever know how to pronounce them. So apologies, especially to people from Hawaii and Tonga, Vanuatu, places where I've mentioned the Marquesas, places where I've mentioned the place names of things. Yeah, so the point of telling these stories is that they demonstrate the deep legends and myths of the people of these places, not countries at the time, but kingdoms and territories, and just kind of these broad places that people lived in, and the importance that Kava played in their identity, in their history, in their mythology, in their sociology, and just the central role that it played in their culture. And just to reflect on that a little bit more, I mean, in our culture, in the United States, if you're listening to this as a United Statesian in the United States, there's a lot of interesting stories about the history of Kava. There are currently like battles online about who opened the first Kava bar in the United States. I mean, I think we all know that the first Kava bar in the United States was the Knock, opened by Jeff Bowman, but other people contest that. And even myself, the Kava Sewer blog, I started the Kava Sewer blog in the kind of 2007 period, and I was just writing reviews of Kava. This was kind of well before it was easy to publish YouTube videos and do podcasts and things like that. So I just wrote about Kava. I did reviews of Kava. I kind of live blogged my experience becoming familiar with Kava and learning about it. In addition, I mean, I know that in American Kava culture, we talk a lot about things like the effect that Kava has on dreams and how it gives us vivid dreams and leads to revelations that we might have in our dreams about ourselves or our family, our relationships. I mean, it plays a very central role in communities that are built around Kava bars. I've seen this in for the 45 or so Kava bars that I've visited. There are people that go every day to the Kava bar, sit down at the Kava bar and drink Kava and have like 12, 13, 20 friends that they see on a regular basis. And these relationships develop into very important things. So yeah, I mean, Kava, in all of the different cultural contexts that it exists, plays an important role. It belongs to so many different cultures, and there are so many rich traditions that surround Kava. I know in Florida, for example, in Boca Raton, there's a really cool dude that I met down there who puts on Kava ceremonies that are not traditional. They're not meant to mirror Fijian or Ni Vanuatu or Tongan or Hawaiian Kava ceremonies, but they're something that mean a lot to the people that experience them in that Florida context. And I heard a really cool story about some visiting Fijian government folks who came from Fiji and were kind of doing a examination of Kava culture in the U.S. And they were moved by this Kava ceremony that was put on by this young man. And afterwards, they came up to him and they thanked him and they said it was beautiful what he had done with Kava. And that's amazing. I mean, it's so cool to see Kava spreading out. That's why it's called the canoe plant, spreading out around the world and taking on new meanings. And, the fact that they had this experience, it's just a beautiful thing. All right, so I'm going to skip over the planting and cultivation piece and go directly into the effect of the narcotic because the agriculture piece I wasn't really that impressed by. If you really want to take a look at it, I can provide a link to this paper in the comments. So the effect of kava as a narcotic drink is often exaggerated by some authors. That's a quote from the author, and I completely agree. There are some accounts that I read of people drinking kava, and there are accounts of kava in novels and travel literature where it's just, I'm like, what are these people drinking? This cannot be the same thing that I've been drinking for the past 20 years. Yeah, I mean, sure enough, it's true. I mean, you see people sometimes drink so much kava that they can't walk, the amount of kava you have to drink to get to that point is really pretty. It's a lot. It's a lot. I'll leave it at that. I've been there before, probably a dozen times. It's not a great feeling. You really don't want to kind of put yourself in that situation. You're basically just relaxing your nerves so much that your eyes kind of are wobbling around in your head and your limbs are numb. And if you, I mean, the last time this happened to me, I was in Florida and I probably had like 35 shells of pretty strong kava, and I felt cross-eyed. My eyes were dancing around in my sockets, and I really needed to like go get some fresh air. And I went outside for a walk, and I remember walking down the sidewalk, and I could not walk straight for the life of me. And it's not the same as like being drunk. It was more, my eyes were not communicating with my legs, and my brain was not communicating with my legs, and I was like really having a hard time getting down the sidewalk. And within 40 minutes or so, I had some water. I sat down, and that feeling went away. But a really good description of the plant comes from an author by the name of A.M. Hocart, who I may have covered in a previous podcast when this was, there were two hosts. But here is a really good description. And excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of my kava really quick. Here is a really good description of kava. The intoxication dulls the countenance. As I experienced it, it gives a pleasant, warm, and cheerful but lazy feeling, sociable though not hilarious or loquacious. The reason is not obscured. Basically, judgment is not obscured. In times, a certain dullness settles on the company in which the kava and the late hour probably both have a part. Once after drinking, I felt miserable and found it difficult to walk straight. On turning into bed, I felt sick and could not get to sleep. Such intoxication is rare because in Lao, the kava is so diluted and served in such small cups that many rounds can be drunk with impunity. Habitual drinkers are said to become intoxicated more quickly than occasional ones. That's due to the reverse tolerance. Kava has no unpleasant reaction the next morning, other than indolence and a lack of appetite. Habitual drinkers can be noted by their watery and bleary eyes, their dull skin, which in bad cases becomes scaly. Now, I know a few people that drink so much kava that their reverse tolerance is like just off the charts, and they have to drink really, really, really weak, or not weak, but mild kava. If they drink something that's like pure waka, lateral roots from Vanuatu, they will just be so absolutely crunk from that shell of kava or two shells of kava that they kind of they go outside and they kind of have this look on their face like they can see through time. It's kind of funny, but it's also, probably a sign that you need to kind of tame it a little bit with how much kava you're drinking. The author then goes into some descriptions about green kava and the difference between green kava and white kava. And I'm sure you're all aware, green kava is kava that is made from the fresh roots of the plant, whereas dried kava is made from roots that have been dried in the sun and then pounded and ground into a medium grind powder. What you buy if you buy kava online in the United States. Now the taste difference between these different types of kava is pretty profound. Kava that is fresh has like this cucumber water kind of taste to it, and is really quite delicious. And if it's made right, the effects are pretty profound. Whereas a dried kava has more of like a kind of muddy pond water type of flavor. Not that I've ever drank pond water, but it's kind of like what you would imagine pond water to taste like. And oftentimes, if it's waka root, which is, again, the lateral roots from a place like Ni Vanuatu, it's going to be kind of peppery. And peppery in like, not a black pepper kind of way, but in like a pine sol smelling kind of way. Very hard to explain. Another interesting part of this paper breaks down the use of kava in different Polynesian and Melanesian societies. And I found it interesting because it's a good encapsulation of how kava is not really either or, ritual or social. And by that, I mean, a lot of different people in the kava space talk about kava being very sacred and only appropriate in ritual contexts. But a lot of people do drink kava just to relax, just to enjoy it, just to, be with their friends and socialize. And that's not only in the United States, that's also in the Pacific Islands. So I'm going to read a couple quotes here that I think are very, that illustrate that very well. So the first one is, even though ceremonial and social drinking is by far the greatest use of kava, it found its way into many other phases of Polynesian life. It was much used in medicine, as a diuretic and for rheumatism and asthma, and as a poultice for headaches. And it was even believed to cause perspiration, which could break a cold or fever when placed under a person lying down. The Hawaiians were very much aware of kava's somnifacient qualities. I am not really familiar what that word means, but I'll let the dear listener do some homework and figure that out. It has been used by all classes of Hawaiians for this purpose, including relaxation. Handy has it from Mrs. Pukui that, contrary to some opinions, kava was not taboo to the lower classes. So this is where we start getting into like discussions about socioeconomic class and royalty and the use of kava in society. The difference seems to lie in the fact that the ali, who are the noble classes, drank socially and for pleasure, the kahuna, who are the priest class, ceremoniously, and the working people for relaxation. In Hawaii, kava was not in short supply. Some particular varieties were retained for special uses, as some of the darker varieties for ceremonial use. Oftentimes, when used in medicine, certain varieties were specified as most effective. As a ceremonial gift, kava was offered to ancestral spirits on the domestic altar and offered to such supernaturals as the shark patron. Don't think I want to run into the shark patron anytime soon. I will say that in the Solomon Islands, when I worked in the Solomon Islands, sharks were considered to be sacred animals at the very top of the totem, and fishers would not capture sharks when they went spearfishing or fishing because they deemed sharks to be kind of in a religious sacred category, sometimes encapsulating or capturing the spirits of ancestors. So to continue, it was at times offered to a spirit through a medium who drank it for the spirit, and was often served to seers who gazed into it and drank it to induce the desired passivity or trance. In this way, kava may be considered something of a hypnotic. Kava was also used in Western Polynesia to induce a removed state of mind. In Uea Island, which is culturally similar to Samoa, Kava was deliberately drunk to bring forth inspiration, as was done on Neo. In Hawaii, psychic diagnosticians use kava to strengthen the spirits, and there is record of this practice as well in the Marquesas. So the only section that I want to talk about in the commercial considerations is related to the influence of missionaries on kava culture and kava cultivation. But before that, I did want to say, very briefly that I do think in the U.S. kava culture community, kava is a very important central part of people's lives who drink kava. I mean, for me, I know I drink kava with friends, and at the end of the night, I look forward to going to sleep because I have very vivid Technicolor dreams. And oftentimes these dreams, reveal important answers to questions that I have in my life. And when I don't drink kava, I don't get those dreams. And this is something I noticed when I was about 19 years old and when I first had kava. So it's not just a correlation is not causation kind of thing. There is a direct link between kava and dreams, and so I can see in these traditional societies how drinking kava and having vivid Technicolor dreams could lead to some kind of spiritual belief or some kind of revelation that could be shared with the community. So back to the paper in this section, which is the last one on commercial considerations. There's a kind of sad diagnosis of the commercial viability of kava in certain parts of the Pacific due to the influence of missionaries. And, this is not meant in any way is a criticism of Christianity or religion. I'm a Catholic, but I do believe that missionaries got this one wrong because what replaced kava in the Pacific Islands? Alcohol. And we all know that alcohol, all of us who drink kava know that alcohol is a much, much, much worse option. And, absolutely has massive damaging effects on society. So here's a quote from the paper on this topic. Missionaries have, of course, killed the potential kava market in many of the Pacific Islands. And in the mid-1800s, the Hawaiian government forbade this drink without a doctor's prescription. This law, however, was not effectively enforced. Even today, it is sometimes possible to buy the kava root in the Hawaiian markets. Now, remember, this is 1956 that this paper came out. From 1885 to the beginning of World War I, kava found its way into the export markets of Hawaii. This product for medicinal use was taken up primarily by Germany, but the value did not exceed $4,000, and substitutes were soon found for kava. It was used in Germany from 1885 up to about 2002, when it was unfortunately mixed with, this is me talking, when it was unfortunately mixed with different chemical solvents, and that led to some health issues, which led to the kava ban, which led to a lot of other things like the Vanuatu Kava Act, which forbade the export of 2-day kavas and kind of triggered the witch hunt on 2-day kava within the U.S. market that happened about 10 years ago. All right, so yeah, that's it. That's the paper. Again, this is Kava, Polynesian Beverage Shrub, written by Ronald Gatty in the Journal of Economic Botany from 1956. I would love to hear your comments on this. I would also love to, in the future, have guests come on. So go ahead and send me an email at kavasewer@gmail.com. And we'll get something set up for a podcast. And I'm going to be doing these bi-weekly, so expect the next one a couple weeks from now. Bula to the hula, and I'll catch you next time. All right.